We have asked each of them to comment on the following questions in relation to their era. First is, which 3 building blocks do you consider most intriguing? Second is, what were the major challenges you encountered? And the third is, what achievements are you proudest of? So I am very happy to welcome first the first Executive Director of Hospice Peterborough, who is Pat Grant, and who was the Executive Director from 1986 to 1990. Welcome, Pat.
I hope I'm close enough. I am. Okay. Well, this is an honor and a day I never thought would happen in my life, and I'm thrilled that it is happening. These questions were well placed and hard to answer because there are so many more things than 3 of this and 2 of that that I could recall. But in the beginning, I would say the fundamental building blocks that I think we locked down, in addition to many others I'll mention, was first getting the idea that a community-based hospice wasn't any less broad in its scope than a residential hospice. We were interested in all aspects of the client and family needs, and that meant the medical and the clinical as well. And probably for me as an ED, what might have been different than any other ED was I was also practicing as a pain management nurse at the same time as being the executive director. So it was an interesting time. And I'm bouncing, is that okay? Yeah, okay. The first, I think, pivotal thing we did was form a relationship with the Ministry of Community and Social Services, where hospice at that point in time sat. And they did not understand things from a clinical perspective, which is okay, but we had to help them understand that you couldn't run a program that kicked in 3 months before someone died without ESP, and you couldn't hang around with the family until 6 weeks after and say goodbye. Grief at 6 weeks, as you all know, is barely even sitting with a person. So that made a big difference in shaping the program for the future when the right ministry took over, which was the Ministry of Health and eventually long-term care. Governments don't like risk, and adopting that understanding meant that ComSoc had to become comfortable with things we in health are comfortable with all the time, and that involves risk. Doing things for the first time, trying things, evaluating, and realize maybe it wasn't the way to go. The other building block I think we made was multi-party tables, and I'm looking at my friend then, Lynn, from United Way. We pushed ourselves into community tables to become the part of the caring circle a family had, and that was critical to the future development of Peterborough. We had to be a legitimate member, not just viewed as a friendly visiting agency. The other thing, I think, was we introduced a new model of loss that Kubler-Ross at the time was trying to sort out her own wording and help people understand that loss was a multi-dimensional process. It didn't come in time stages. They didn't come in order. And they were often in conflict with each other at the same time. So that was a building block that led to really great grief counseling and the freedom to offer that whenever it was needed. The major challenges, when we met for this meeting, the hospice staff laughed. I didn't, but they laughed at the fact that we had no furniture. And it was really hard. It sounds like a silly thing, but to be taken seriously in your role, we had to get the ministry to understand we needed a computer. The computer needed a desk. The desk needed a chair. And we all couldn't sit in it at the same time, nor could we all use the same telephone. So it took time. We searched rummage sales. We eventually put together an office for 3 staff, by hook or by crook. And then once people got onto what the program was about, including the ministry, we actually got some funding that helped us tremendously. But in my first budget, I literally had to state how many stamps I would use in 1 year. So that's how tight and narrow. We started with $15,000. And we attribute that vision and faith to good Athene, who thought we were ready to launch, and we launched. You can imagine what the job paid. So I'll leave that. But that's also proof that people come for love. They don't come for money. They come for mission. The next biggest challenge was the state of palliative care in Peterborough. It was very fundamental in its development, and with the work of John Beamish, myself, and two of your own, Carol Sadler, a pharmacist with the hospital. Hello! Oh my gosh, my hero. And your own Linda Kehoe and Teresa Morris. We developed teaching tools, another one, oh my gosh. Teaching tools that elevated the management of pain in Peterborough. Not just in the community, in the hospital, everywhere. And working with John Beamish, we produced a manual that I'm going to talk about at the very end. The third challenge, and this was so interesting, and still is to me, was AIDS. And at that point, it barely had a name, and it wasn't AIDS. And at that time in my life, I was also teaching at Fleming College, and I was teaching an immunity course. And in teaching that course 3 times, the disease had 3 different names and 3 different ways of getting it, and none of them pointed at its prevalence across all populations and all races. It pointed only to gay men. So the disease was laden with prejudice, laden with avoidance. It was nothing for me to be teaching on a unit and find the trays of patients sitting on the floor outside the room. This was what we were facing in the community, but it brought two sides to the sword. One were people who were so wanting to help, but had to accept that universal precautions were going to keep them safe, and they didn't need a Tyvek suit. The other were those who were so committed to our clients, they didn't want to gown, they didn't want to wash their hands, they didn't want to wear gloves because they saw all of that as an offense to their good friends. So interestingly, when we started out, we had 3 AIDS clients barely after we got our doors open. But we had no trouble getting volunteer support for any one of them. It was an amazing time. One of those clients was a grandfather who had tainted blood, and his greatest fear was seeing his own grandchildren. And so there was so much teaching to do and so much family support to do, but we had to realize no one really knew anything about AIDS other than it was lethal. The achievement I was most proud of, and still am, was that John Beamish, Carol Sadler, others, myself included, developed a hospice pain management manual. We printed it ourselves, and that manual floated all over Ontario, and we individually went with it. We copied it, we taught it. It moved into the hospital. It made such a difference for caring doctors who were so afraid to give too much of this, too much of that, and didn't think broadly to include alternate therapies and adjunctive drugs. So it was marvelous. Last year, this time, my mother died, and her palliative care physician was Dr. Plack. John Beamish and I both studied under Dr. Plack. I'm gonna have a hard time getting this out. Dr. Plack was at Mom's bedside, and then it hit her. Peterborough. She remembered the manual, she remembered the work, not just that we did, but that this organization did from the beginning at the grassroots level. And I am so happy to say that was my proudest achievement. You were the other side of it. This is still grassroots. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We learned so much from you, truly. Next, I would like to invite Richard Johnston, who was the executive director between 1992 and 1996. But we somehow are able to lure him back in all the time. So Richard is actually also currently a board member of Hospice Peterborough.
everybody hear me all right? Goody, can you hear me? Goody. Okay, that's all that counts, really. My mother-in-law is good at hearing, so I have to be on my best behavior today. I actually met Goody she's the principal founder of Hospice Peterborough in 1986. About a year later, in 1987, I had the honor of marrying Goody's daughter, the one and only Amy. Quite literally, we were barely back from our honeymoon when I was encouraged by Goody to join the board of Hospice Peterborough. Imagine that. And how could you say no to Goody? So I said yes. So this year I celebrate 37 years of marriage to Annie and 37 years of marriage to Hospice Peterborough. But both of these events have changed my life for the better and made it so much richer, so thank you, Goody. I truly loved being part of the Hospice Peterborough family, first as a board member, and then from 92 to 96 as ED, and then 2 more terms on the board, including my current term. But without a doubt, my most gratifying experience was a more recent one, to chair the building committee for our wonderful new facility. That was an amazing, amazing experience. And I still get shivers every time I walk into that building and see it filled with wonderful people. So why, you might ask, would Hospice Peterborough hire a young civil engineer to be its executive director in '92? Certainly not to fill the shoes of Pat Grant. I can only guess the board wanted somebody who could identify obstacles and challenges and move the organization forward in a strategic and fiscally sound manner. I think my best strategic move was to find us new office space. Now, only an engineer would move a healthcare organization into a concrete strip mall, squeezed between an Italian hair salon and a greasy diner on Lower Elmer Street. I did it, perhaps not my finest hour, but the parking was great. I could get lunch anytime, and I could walk in for a haircut. But enough about me. Today I'm supposed to talk about building blocks, challenges, and accomplishments between 92 and 96. In the essence of time, I've combined them. And you may hear a common theme through all of these addresses today. My 3 were getting established and spreading the word, that's one, securing more stable funding, and finally building our volunteer base. So after settling into our lovely strip mall, we needed to hire staff. And we were fortunate to recruit 3 excellent case managers who stayed with us for many years, 1 volunteer coordinator, you may know her, Linda Sunderland, an office manager, and we hired our first part-time grief support counselor. You'll know him too, Lyle Horn. Later, Mark Hines joined us. A few years later, after getting funding for pain and symptom management coordinator, we hired Teresa Morris. Hi, Teresa. I didn't recognize you there. And of course, all of our clinical programs were under the watchful eye of yet another founder, John Beamish, Dr. Beamish, and supported by 2 wonderful volunteer physicians, Dr. Paul Craig and Dr. Stefan Regas. So our clinical work was slowly developing, but not without some teething pains. These were early years. Some of the other agencies were a little reserved in recognizing us and accepting our services and seeing how we were going to fit into the professional community. But we had to prove ourselves, and we did. We also set out to spread the word. I remember visiting virtually every service organization and most churches to speak about my own personal journey in palliative care and about the services and supports of hospice. I know our clinical staff met with many healthcare agencies. We met with funeral directors and lawyers, and even the Ennismore Ladies Knitting Club. I remember that one. Literally anyone who was interested. We also started a volunteer speakers committee, an opportunity that still exists today at Hospice. We were all crusaders, really, introducing people to the whole concept of hospice care, which was relatively new at the time to Canada. Number 2, securing more stable funding. Getting annual funding for a young agency was tough. We had more than $15,000, but less than $250,000, which was not a lot to run a program with 5 staff and rent an office. And we had to raise half of that through our own fundraising efforts. We were very fortunate to get ComSoc funding. We also got funding from the City of Peterborough to support our grief support programs. We were also a United Way agency, thank you, Lynn. And Dawn Barry Merriam, another co-founder actually of Hospice Peterborough, was a constant champion for us at the District Health Council. Oh, I won't read your points. They all knew that we were doing great work at a reasonable cost. We also had a very ambitious fundraising program, including, and some of you will remember, exotic and somewhat famous themed fundraising dinners, including into Africa, in an empty hangar at the Peterborough Airport, on to Rome, in a huge warehouse at the Siemens building, an evening in Paris, in the armories. We decided we were going to have a different theme every year in a different location, and we did it. We also had summer lobster and clam bakes on Stony Lake. And I remember picking up the fresh seafood from the airport. We flew it in from Nova Scotia, and we cooked it all up on the shores of Stony Lake, hosted by John and Allison Stone. They were a lot of fun, these events. They sold out quickly, a lot of work, but they raised much needed funds and built a community of friends and supporters. In '92, we launched the now famous Festival of Trees, a 1-week-long Christmas spectacle at the Memorial Center. Remember that, Carol? Yeah. We actually, Hospice, convinced the 2 hospitals to partner with us. I remember very clearly making the pitch to the hospitals, and they were a little reluctant. Why do we need hospice? I said, well, we're bringing the idea to you. So it was quite a proud David and Goliath moment in our history. But it worked flawlessly, and we established a long-term relationship with both hospitals, Civic and St. Joe's at the time. So our volunteers recreated a full Victorian village, complete with a general store, a kid shop, a tea room, and even a live petting zoo, all in the Memorial Center. We had events like gala opening, the teddy bear breakfast, the celebrity lunch, and many other events. Len Lifchus was one of our more colorful celebrities at this ceremony. I'm just saying. In our first year, we had 20,000 visitors. 20,000 in our first year. And we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the 3 organizations. Over 22 years, Festival of Trees raised more than $4.5 million for these 3 groups. Some years, checks of $100,000 would come to each organization. It was amazing. It was by far our largest source of income beyond government funding. We made a lot of friends. Local businesses became our friends and supporters and remain so today. Finally, we built our volunteer base, the true building blocks of hospice. With Linda Sunderland leading our ever-popular volunteer training and visiting program, we set about to engage with the movers and shakers of Peterborough. Many of our volunteers and supporters came from the more than 300 folks with the Festival of Trees. Joan and Linda will tell you more about our amazing volunteer builders and renovators, including Group Soup. Stay tuned. Board chairs like Jane Dudas, Nancy Martin, Margaret Ellen Disney. Some of you may remember Isabella Henniger. Really, these were all the power women of Peterborough. They helped to establish our credibility as board chairs and steer the organization forward. One of my favorite stories was coming back to hospice after more than a decade's absence. We moved up to Young's Point. It was post-COVID, and I came back and arrived at our new facility for a meeting. I couldn't help but notice a lot of the same volunteers who were sitting there like 12 years later. I think Nan Yersonic was on the front desk. Judy Land was there at one point. Where's my last page? No. It was like a true homecoming. I know I am totally biased, but I'm gonna say it anyways. I think Hospice Peterborough has the best and most caring volunteers, bar none. So in summary, the years 92 to 96 were formative ones. We established the organization and spread the word. We secured more stable funding, and we built our volunteer base. But please note, the key word here is we. Thank you all. My advice for the future, carry on caring. You can't go wrong. Thank you all for being here today and continuing your wonderful support of the organization we all love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. We are looking forward to the next 30 years with you. Hospice in some kind of role. And now I invite Joan Higginson, who was our Executive Director from 1996 to 2004.
Thank you, Courtney, and all the team at Hospice. Thank you for inviting me to help celebrate Hospice Peterborough's 36th AGM. You heard that I was hired in '96 and served until 2004. 2004 means that I retired 20 years ago. So when I had a call from Hoyne and Allison to talk about 20 years ago, what were the challenges, some of those things I think I had put out of my mind. There were lots of helpful ones as well, but the fact that I could even remember some of them was a challenge. In the interest of time, I'm going to leave out the names of some of the people I would have liked to recognize, particularly the special people I worked with, board members, staff, and volunteers, and community agencies as well. I need to say that when we got instructions for what to cover today, I zeroed in on the piece that was do it in 5 minutes max. So I've spent the last week or two cutting out things that I might have said to you. So I hope that I still covered interesting things, but it's somewhat different than the wonderful array of activities and events that the first two speakers could mention. The 3 topics, though, the 3 building blocks that I want to mention just briefly are location, and that means location, 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 of course. Hospice as an employer, and hospice finances. When I arrived, one of the main issues was the need for additional space at 250 Sherbrooke. You have already heard about the cement block building. Well, we got too big for it, and the landlord, not wanting to lose us as good tenants, promptly arranged to double our space. I think we took over the barbershop shop next door and several businesses on the 2nd floor. He installed a chairlift, built us a library with a gas fireplace and other amenities, all at a really affordable rate. But who could turn it down? We couldn't. We got lots more space. But that spaciousness didn't last long. The hospice staff were busy with all of their work, and hospice was, by the early 2000s, bursting at the seams. In addition to more space, we dreamed about finding a welcoming, peaceful, home-like setting with a garden. And the 2-story brick home next to St. Andrews on Rubidge Street offered all those things. plus parking, an accessible entry, a welcoming and spacious church right next door that made themselves available to us. The church elders offered to rent to us at about the level that we had been paying, but we were responsible for the cost of design and renovation. But a Home for Hospice appeal was launched and in short order reached its $200,000 goal. The volunteers who worked on building for the annual Festival of Trees took on much of the work of the demolition and building chores at what came to be called the manse. With their work, the support of many local businesses and a decorating team, the project came in on budget. The design for the garden area was gifted to us by a local landscape architect and completed by a team of volunteers. The garden area became a key gathering place at our new home for people needing to just spend some time outdoors. Important place for gathering and thinking things through. When construction of the building was complete, the building volunteers were celebrated at an elaborate dinner party prepared and served by the board members. Having this new space meant that there were new support groups and trainings offered, many for a half day, followed by lunch and social time. We were blessed with a group called Caring Cooks, and also the hospice singers made their way. While I was catching my breath from the manse project, rumblings began about considering possibilities for a residential hospice. I was tired. But clearly John Beamish was just getting started. So my next building block has to do with staff, and I learned early on that attracting excellent staff and paying them well had been top of mind for the founders and the board since the beginning of hospice. In the late 1990s, the province of Ontario was finalizing work on its new pay equity legislation designed to redress the lower wages often received for women's work. This legislation increased public awareness of women's issues and offered the possibility of additional funds. Hospice's pay equity plan was approved with new and annualized funding by the Ministry of Health. Hospice already had a cost-shared extended health and benefit package for staff, and in the early 2000s also added an RRSP benefit. Each of these initiatives helped the board, way back then, to meet its objective of being an excellent employer. I fully expect that commitment extends to this day and beyond. You've heard about the Festival of Trees from Richard. Well, it was already established and thriving when I arrived. They just forgot to tell me at the interview that I would be attending meetings at 7 a.m. However, it still was very much a fundraising delight, and was fun hearing all the stories, Richard, that you were describing about what was available at the Festival of Trees. So you know that one of the recipients received as much as $100,000 on an annual basis. Hospice was also being funded at that time, or fundraised, through an annual financial appeal, donations from clients and families. The hike for hospice was just getting organized. I think on our first hike, when we were out at Trent, we got lost. But I'm sure that the fundraisers are doing things differently now. And it was the corn charity indeed lost on a farmer's field. The fundraising was done primarily by volunteers and board members who took responsibility for so much of this. And with the support of a board treasurer, there was never a time when I needed to be concerned about hospice's financial health. I expect that also extends to this day and beyond. Since the invitation from Heidi and Allison to speak to you, I have enjoyed a sentimental journey, remembering events, successes, and challenges of my time at hospice. I'm grateful for today and have every confidence that board members, staff, and especially volunteers will keep hospice moving forward. And I can't help but wonder what comes next.
Thank you so much, Joan. I often wonder as well what comes next.
Hello everyone. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person with all of you, but I'm happy to share my version of the changes that happened at Hospice Peterborough while I was at the helm. In preparing for today, I looked up some old documents that covered the period from 2005 until we opened the doors to our new facility in 2019. Honestly, it made me tired just to review everything that we did in those 15 years, but it was an exciting time for all. Moving to our new home on Rubik Street gave space for our programs and services to grow and enhanced our visibility within our community. So it was no surprise that Hospice's 2004 strategic plan set the goal to complete the initial steps towards establishment of a hospice residence. At that time, there was no funding to build or run a hospice residence, so it was a real leap of faith on the part of our board of directors to set this goal. We started with a residential hospice task force in 2005 and developed and conducted surveys with the community, our clients, and our partners. The task force report determined that a hospice residence was needed and would fill an existing gap in care. In 2006, we applied for and received funding to support a feasibility study to determine hospice's ability to establish a hospice residence, to raise the necessary funds, to build it, and to operate it. That same year, $580,000 of annualized funding for 10-bed hospice residences across the province was announced by the Ministry of Health, and Hospice Peterborough was on that first list to receive the funding. It was a very encouraging turn of events. The feasibility study determined hospice had a few things to do before we started the hospice residence project. The board approved hiring a development coordinator who could focus completely on fundraising and raising awareness. That would free up the executive director to take a lead role in the project and position us for success. In 2007, we established our residential hospice development committee made up of hospice staff, volunteers, and community partners. By 2011, our new strategic plan identified the concept of developing a center of excellence for hospice care, which would include a 10-bed hospice residence. The board also approved a motion to negotiate the purchase of the London Street property. In 2012, we developed a site plan, water management strategy, environmental study, property carrying costs, parking requirements, agreement of purchase, rezoning application, had a neighborhood meeting, and presented a site plan. The City of Peterborough approved the necessary rezoning of the London property, and we submitted all necessary pre-capital documents to the LIN. We finalized the property purchase and developed our functional plan summary. In 2013, I made a presentation to the LIN Board of Directors outlining our planning framework, which included our care and service plan, financial plan, construction and building plan, fundraising plan, communications and community relations plan. We hired our architects to complete a concept design study and a campaign team to undertake a campaign planning study. We were off. In 2014, we finalized our Every Moment Matters campaign cabinet, developed the case for support, and launched the campaign. And then from 2015 to 2019, we raised money, kept building, and did all the background work to ensure we would provide the very best care in the most welcoming and home-like environment. I've been asked to focus on the 3 building blocks I consider most integral to my tenure and accomplishments at Hospice Peterborough. For me, it has always been about the people. And I would say the 3 building blocks are 3 connected, yet different groups of people that make Hospice Peterborough what it is today. First, the clients and families we support, who come to Hospice Peterborough at a most difficult time in their lives and are willing to open up, be honest, and seek support, really the hardest things to do. This is one of the groups we spoke to when we were doing that feasibility study back in 2006. They shared their ideas of what a hospice residence would mean to them, what it should look like and feel like and offer. They truly helped us set the tone and the feel of what we would ultimately create. The next group is our community, our donors, our partner organizations, the other hospices in our LHIN and across the province, who all shared so generously. Hospice Palliative Care Ontario, the City and County of Peterborough, the LHIN and the Ministry of Health. We wouldn't have had success without these strong connections. And lastly, it's a group of people most closely connected to the work we do, the volunteers and staff and medical health professionals who make all the magic possible. Of course, this group expanded exponentially during the fundraising campaign, the building, planning, and all the preparations necessary to determine how we would provide care, who would provide the care, and what fittings, furniture, and equipment we would need. Then we hired the people to make that happen. It was very intense. We had many challenges with the building project, mostly related to trying to rejuvenate an old building and connect it to a new building that would house the 10 bedrooms of the residents. The quick version is that it didn't work. We saw our campaign, which started at $6.5 million, increase to $8.58 million before we even started construction. It finished at $10.62 million. But we completed a revised build successfully, raised all the money we needed, and opened our doors with no debt, new policies, procedures, and a motivated staff team. In my years at Hospice Peterborough, I heard so many people say that no matter what you are going through or planning to do, life just happens. For me, just as the capital campaign was getting started, I learned I needed to have heart surgery in September 2014. I had 2 weeks to prepare and then was off until December. And things just continued on without me. Staff and volunteers worked extra hard to keep things running smoothly until I returned and carried on with a heart that was working better than ever. And then, as we were heading into our last year of construction, I got a call at work in July 2018 that my husband was in emerge. I went to PRHC to find out what was going on and waited with Ken until he was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. You just can't prepare for that. I took time off. People stepped up. Luckily, Ken had surgery and started his radiation and chemo, and he insisted I return to work to finish the project. I wonder if Ken knew that 4 years later he would die at the hospice, where our whole family received outstanding care, and I could finally truly understand what the team who created this building had accomplished. Every time I drive up Rubridge Street, I look at Hospice Peterborough and feel so proud and grateful that I was part of creating that space full of tears, laughter, companionship, understanding, and excellent care. All of you here today should also be proud and grateful to be continuing the Hospice Peterborough legacy of care. Thank you.